Above 8,000 meters in the Himalayas, your body is shutting down. Oxygen drops to a third of what you're used to. Temperatures plummet to minus 35 degrees Celsius, and winds barrel past 100 kilometers per hour. Over 1,000 climbers have died here since 1950, and some of the most horrific deaths ever caught on camera happened exactly where rescue is all but impossible. On this frozen frontier, the world's most experienced mountaineers are brought to their knees by exhaustion, avalanches, and split-second decisions. This is the story behind the 5 most horrific Himalaya deaths ever captured. David Sharp arrived at Everest's North Base Camp with a plan that cut every possible corner. Instead of joining a guided expedition, he purchased a $7,000 no-service permit from Asian Trekking, a fraction of the $65,000 charged by commercial teams. This package offered little more than access to the mountain. There was no assigned Sherpa, no radio, and no satellite phone. Sharp would climb alone, carrying his own gear and making his own decisions, without backup. For oxygen, he brought just 2 bottles, not the usual 4 or 5. Each bottle, under heavy exertion, could last only a few hours above 8,000 meters. Once empty, there would be no way to refill. In the weeks before his summit push, Sharp acclimatized by shuttling loads up and down the mountain. He lost weight, moved slowly, and kept mostly to himself. Other climbers noticed his battered boots and frost-bitten toes, a legacy from his earlier Everest attempt in 2003. When asked about his strategy, Sharp explained that he preferred to move light and fast, even if it meant accepting higher risk. Without a support team, he would have no one to check on his progress, call for help, or share spare oxygen if something went wrong. On the night of May 13th, Sharp set out for the summit alone. The route ahead was crowded with commercial teams, but he intended to find his own way through the darkness. With only 2 oxygen bottles, every step had to count. If the weather turned or he slowed down, there would be no margin for error. The climb had become a gamble. One man, alone in the death zone, with nothing but his own judgment and the hope that his limited supplies would last long enough to see him home. As daylight crept over the North Col, a line of climbers snaked along the ridge, faces hidden behind oxygen masks and mirrored goggles. In the narrow hollow known as Green Boots Cave, David Sharp sat motionless, arms wrapped around his knees, eyelashes rimmed with ice. One after another, climbers squeezed past the rocky alcove, some pausing to look, others barely glancing down. By noon, more than 40 people had passed within arm's reach. Some mistook Sharp for the long-dead body known as Green Boots, a grim landmark on the route. Others recognized his distress, but pressed on, weighed down by exhaustion, dwindling oxygen, or the pressure to reach the summit before weather closed in. Radio chatter from above focused on summit times and team locations. No coordinated rescue was launched. A few climbers, including members of a Discovery Channel team, paused to assess Sharp's condition. Their footage later aired worldwide, showing him slumped in the cave, barely responsive. Advice from base camp came back cold. "He's too far gone." The images ignited an international firestorm. Headlines accused Everest climbers of stepping over the dying to chase their own glory. Sir Edmund Hillary, the first man to stand on Everest's summit, condemned the new summit-first mentality. "They don't give a damn for anybody else who may be in distress," he said. The mountain's code had shifted. Ambition now outweighed compassion. The world watched, and the debate over Everest's soul grew louder than ever. Rob Hall spent years guiding clients up Everest, always insisting on strict turnaround times. But on May 10, 1996, as a fierce storm swept over the southeast ridge, Hall broke his own rule. Doug Hansen, a postal worker from Seattle and Hall's client, reached the summit hours behind schedule. By the time they began their descent, afternoon clouds had already swallowed the upper slopes. The wind howled, and visibility dropped to nothing. Hansen collapsed near the south summit at 8,700 meters. Hall refused to leave him behind. Through the night, the temperature plunged below minus 35 degrees Celsius. Hall radioed base camp at 4:43 a.m., voice weak but clear. Hansen was gone. Hall's own oxygen was nearly exhausted. Frostbite had already taken his hands and feet. Still, he stayed put, hoping for a break in the weather or a rescue that could never come. As daylight returned, Hall's condition worsened. He described the pain in his limbs and the growing numbness in his legs. Colleagues pleaded with him to try to move, but he was pinned by exhaustion and cold. The storm raged for another day, cutting off all hope of help from below. In his final hours, Hall was patched through to his wife, Jan Arnold, who was thousands of kilometers away in New Zealand and pregnant with their first child. His last words carried across the static. "Sleep well, my darling. Please don't worry too much." The radio fell silent soon after. Hall's body remains on the south summit, a silent witness to the cost of devotion and the power of the mountain. For many, his final stand became a symbol of loyalty and sacrifice, an act of love in the heart of the world's deadliest storm. Scott Fischer, 40 years old and famed for his strength, had summited Everest before. On May 10, 1996, he led his Mountain Madness team into the death zone with confidence, but by afternoon, something was wrong. At 8,430 meters, near a narrow perch called the balcony, Fischer's pace slowed to a crawl. He staggered, slurred his words, and couldn't fasten his oxygen mask. Lobsang Jangbu Sherpa, climbing with him, noticed Fischer was speaking nonsense and drifting in and out of awareness. These were the classic signs of high-altitude cerebral edema, fluid swelling the brain, a silent killer at extreme altitude. Lobsang tried to help, first by dragging Fischer down the ridge, then by propping him up and urging him to move. Each attempt failed. Even with a Sherpa's strength, Fischer's body was too heavy, his limbs unresponsive. The wind howled and the temperature plummeted. Darkness fell, and rescue was impossible. Other teams were scattered, exhausted, and fighting for survival themselves. Radios crackled with fragments of desperate calls, but no one could reach Fischer in time. Through the night, Fischer's breathing grew shallow. He drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes mumbling, sometimes silent. Lobsang stayed as long as he could, but the cold forced him to retreat to Camp 4. By morning, Fischer was gone, another victim claimed by the mountain's thin air and brutal cold. His body was later recovered and cremated, but his legacy remains as a warning. No amount of experience, strength, or bravado can outlast the effects of altitude on the human brain. In the death zone, biology always decides who lives and who dies. A GoPro camera, battered and dusted with snow, lay buried at nearly 5,800 meters on the flanks of Nanda Devi East. When searchers from the Indo-Tibetan Border Police finally recovered it, the device held a record of the final moments before disaster. The helmet footage begins in the half-light of dawn. 7 climbers, roped together, edge along a knife-thin ridge. Their voices are muffled by wind and altitude. Every step sends up a spray of powder as they inch forward. Harnesses taut, crampons biting into the crust. In the background, the mountain's shadow stretches over endless white. A sudden jolt shakes the frame. The camera tumbles, spinning sky and ice into a blur. Then darkness. Avalanche experts later analyze the footage, tracing the event to a cornice collapse, an overhanging ledge of snow giving way under the team's weight. The avalanche moves too fast for reaction. Within seconds, the rope team vanishes beneath tons of shifting snow. The rescue operation lasts nearly 3 weeks. ITBP teams battle unstable debris and thin air, finally recovering 7 bodies. 1 climber remains missing. The GoPro's last images serve not as spectacle, but as haunting evidence of the mountain's raw, unpredictable force. Technology, meant to capture triumph, preserves the moment when nature asserts its final authority. On October 7, 2023, Anna Gutu set out for the summit of Shishapangma, chasing the title of first American woman to climb all 14 of the world's 8,000-meter peaks. She wasn't alone. Rival teams moved up the mountain at the same time, each step tracked by sponsors, followers, and a growing online audience. Heavy snow had fallen in the days before. Chinese and Tibetan authorities warned all climbers to wait at least 24 hours for the snowpack to stabilize. But the pressure to reach the top and to claim the record overpowered caution. By mid-morning, Anna and Mingmar Sherpa were above 7,800 meters, crossing a slope loaded with fresh, wind-blown snow. The slab gave way beneath them. A wall of snow, hundreds of meters wide, broke loose and raced down the mountain. 4 climbers vanished: Anna, Mingmar, Gina Marie Rizuchidlo, and Tenjen Sherpa, all swept away by the avalanche. 2 others were injured. The avalanche was not a surprise to experts. Meteorologists had flagged the hazard, and local officials repeated the warnings. Still, multiple teams ignored the risk, driven by the urgency of record attempts and the promise of fame. In a world where summit photos and real-time updates bring instant recognition, the stakes for hesitation feel higher than ever. The mountain, unmoved by ambition or audience, delivered its verdict in seconds. Turnaround times are written in expedition manuals for a reason. When the clock runs out, no matter how close the summit, guides and climbers who stick to the rule have the highest chance of coming home. Rob Hall's strict policies once saved lives, but even the best can be tempted to push too far. On crowded summit days, the difference between a safe descent and disaster is often measured in minutes, not hours. Reliable communication is the next line of defense. Radios and satellite phones connect teams to weather updates, rescue advice, and each other. When batteries freeze or devices are left behind, vital information disappears. In the case of David Sharp, the absence of a working radio meant no coordinated rescue and no warning to other climbers. Every modern expedition now double-checks communications before leaving high camp. No piece of gear can replace respect for the snowpack. Avalanche risk is not just a matter of luck. On Shishapangma, ignoring a 24-hour stabilization window after heavy snow proved fatal. Guides now probe slopes, study recent weather, and wait when the mountain says wait. These lessons, paid for in lives, are the foundation of every safe climb. The mountain will always be stronger, but knowledge and discipline can tip the odds in a climber's favor. Since 1950, over 1,000 climbers have lost their lives in the Himalayas, numbers confirmed by expedition records and rescue logs. This documentary has shown how even the most seasoned mountaineers like David Sharp, Rob Hall, and Anna Gutu were ultimately undone by the unpredictable forces of altitude, weather, and human decision-making. Technology, from radio calls to helmet cameras, captured their last moments, but could not prevent tragedy. Many questions remain. Exactly how many perish in remote regions each year, and what decisive actions might have saved more lives? While modern protocols and improved rescue options have reduced recent fatality rates, competitive pressure and environmental hazards continue to challenge every ascent. The evidence is clear. In the death zone, experience and ambition offer no guarantees. The mountain's risks remain, and each decision above 8,000 meters carries consequences that no camera can fully capture.